Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Company was located on the southern border of Maryland, 184 miles from Georgetown within the District of Columbia to Cumberland, Maryland. Of that distance, 180 of those miles were in Maryland, on Maryland's southern border. So it was situated in such a way that it's logical that it would be drawn into the Civil War, into the conflict at an early date. And such was the case. Only a week after the Confederates occupied Harper's Ferry, the canal was sort of drawn into the conflict. On April 24th, Confederate cavalry crossed the river and proceeded to Berlin, Maryland, which is modern-day Brunswick. They came upon a canal boat loaded with grain. A grain merchant there by the name of Charles Wenner was getting ready to send that boat to Georgetown. The Confederates demanded that he give up the boat to them. They took it down the river down canal to Point of Rocks. It was transferred. The grain was transferred into the cars of the Bean and Railroad, and it was sent to Harper's Ferry.
Maryland's Governor Thomas Holliday Hicks wrote asking for Wenner's account in writing. Wenner wrote to the sheriff, "There is about 200 Virginia troops here, everything under their control. Since they have taken my boat, it is truly warlike here, with clashing of swords. They will have discharged by noon, feeding the troops with the oats. They are all troops here." Baylor's men took all Wenner's mules, so he had to walk home, as they also took the grain from his boat and reloaded it onto railroad cars bound for Harper's Ferry, and some across the bridge from Point of Rocks into Virginia. Enough grain to feed 100 horses. Wenner also noticed Baylor's men of the 12th Virginia Cavalry planting some 6 cords of wood to the bridge at Berlin in preparation for its destruction.
Now, this created a political problem between Maryland and Virginia. Virginia still hoped that Maryland may join the Confederacy. In fact, Maryland's General Assembly had recently been called into session by Maryland's governor. So they hoped that the General Assembly would take some steps towards secession.
Around May 1st, the committee appointed by the Maryland House of Delegates arrived at Harper's Ferry to fact-find on Wenner's loss and other interstate goings-on. They met the just-arrived new commander, then Colonel Thomas Jonathan Jackson. Jackson's widow later wrote, "He had taken possession of the Maryland Heights, which towered so far above the village, and Bolivar Heights as greatly to endanger his force should they be seized by the enemy. In his dispatches to the government, he declared his determination, if attacked, to make such a resistance as should convince the enemy of the desperate resolution of the people of the South." She went on, "Nevertheless, Jackson met his dignified visitors with courtesy, as the cooperation of Maryland was earnestly desired by the South, and some of Colonel Jackson's friends were curious to see how he would stand the test of being questioned upon military matters and keep his secrets, while yet showing the utmost politeness to his guests. After pumping him for some time without any satisfactory result, one of the delegation ventured to ask directly, 'Colonel, how many troops have you?' He promptly replied, 'I should be glad if Lincoln thought I had 15,000. Jackson actually had half that number, if that. After the visit from the Marylanders, Jackson reported to General Robert E. Lee his actions in response to the delicate political situation along the Potomac at Harper's Ferry. "I have occupied the Virginia and Maryland Heights, and I am about fortifying the Virginia side with blockhouses of sufficient strength to resist an attempt to carry them by storm. Whenever the emergency calls for it, I shall construct similar works on the Maryland Heights, and thus far I have been deterred from doing so by a desire to avoid giving offense to the latter state."
The Confederate political leaders were urging Jackson of Harper's Ferry, Thomas J. Jackson, to avoid provocative acts. But he was disinclined to do so, let's put it that way. But anyway, the grain was seized, and ultimately Maryland's legislature, they were sympathetic toward the South. In fact, they had been elected only a month after the John Brown raid, so that it was dominated by states' rights Democrats. So each state ultimately appointed a commissioner. They went to the border, investigated the incident, the seizure of the canal boats. And again, because the Confederates wanted to encourage Marylanders to join them, wanted to try and avoid provocative acts, they eventually reimbursed Mr. Winter for the cost of his grain. So while the nation was going to war, or preparing to go to war, you see Maryland and Virginia engaging in diplomacy to resolve this early dispute. However, that diplomacy, of course, would later break down.
Throughout these negotiations, Confederate commanders were positioning to pounce on and destroy any railroad, any canal waterways, and any bridges the moment they supplied Union forces. Earlier on May 6th, General Lee had already ordered Jackson, "Colonel, I considered it probable that the government of Washington will make a movement against Harper's Ferry and occupy the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad with that view, or use the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal for the transportation of troops. You are desired to watch these avenues of approach and endeavor to frustrate their designs. On receiving certain intelligence of the approach of troops, it will become necessary to destroy the bridge at Harper's Ferry and obstruct their passage by the canal as much as possible."